This episode of Brains on Games is a preview of a game about crafting the best mine. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we are going to preview a game that's coming up on Kickstarter really soon. A game that was sent to me not too long ago by the folks over at Ende Games, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. It's a game called Dinamine. Look at this box. It's amazing. Dinamine is a game that works with kids aged 8 and up. It's for 2 to 4 players, and a game can be played only in about 25 to 35 minutes. Let's take a deeper look at Dinamine. Dinamine is a tile-laying game that is, I would say, light in terms of its complexity. We'll talk more about the gameplay as we get into it. We won't focus too much on the components because this is a Kickstarter prototype, so who knows what the components will look like when everything is all done. You're going to have a marketplace of tiles to draw from, and you're going to choose those tiles in order to create the best mine in your game. It's not Minecraft, but you are crafting the best mine. One of the things that you will find in the box is a 6-sided die. Although, of course, it's a cube, so it has 6 sides. They are not numbered from 1 to 6. There are 2 1s, 2 2s, 1 3, and 1 4. So the highest you can roll is a 4, but you're more likely to roll a 1 or a 2 than any other number. The game is played over 10 rounds, and the goal is to have the most valuable mine at the end of that point. You earn points in the game by placing altars or wells or dragon fossils in your mine, and by having veins of gems. And the deeper the vein, the more valuable it is. There are also some missions that you might get some bonus points for achieving. For example, having a certain tile in a certain place in your mine will earn you some extra bonus points at the end of the game. And there are rewards also at the end of the game for having the most tiles, or the deepest mine, or the mine that has the most altars, or the most wells, or the most fossils in it. Each player starts the game with a little tiny castle with the beginning of a mine underneath. So you've got a little tunnel that branches off in 3 different directions. The first player is going to flip a round token. There are 10 of these, so it's super easy to keep track of what round you're in. You don't have to do anything extra other than make sure you flip over the literal round token. It's round. It's the only round token in the game, and it does keep track of the rounds. So you've got this number, a couple of pips on this one, each round, and they're randomized. So you're shuffling these up at the beginning, so you don't know what's going to happen when. You might turn one over that's going to allow you to move a tile in your mine, or this one is neat. It's got, I'll show you here, but I'll show you on the little camera as well. It's got a question mark on it, and the goal here is you roll the die, but if you can guess the number that you're going to roll before you roll it, you will get to add 1 to that number, and this is going to represent your build points on that turn. If this were the first round token to be flipped over, that means each player is going to start with 2 build tokens, if you want to call it that, or build points, and then the first player will roll the die, and they're likely to roll a 1 or a 2. Then you add that total. So if I rolled a 2 and there's 2 pips on the round token, I'm going to have 4 build points. And you may be able to see on the camera, maybe I'll hold one up a little bit closer, that each of the tiles has a little die on it with the number. That's the number of points you need to have in order to purchase that tile during your turn. So they go from 1 to 6. Everything is lined up that way. You may be able to see there's little dice on the these are like little organizer tokens, really. My hope is that when this game finally does come out, that there's maybe a stretch goal for some sort of a mat to help to organize these things, because we always seem to learn what my weaker skills are when we talk about these games, but just keeping everything lined up would be a little bit easier if there were some sort of a mat underneath, then you wouldn't have to fiddle around with all these little arrows and letters. But you've got a grid like this that you have to choose from, and if I had a total of 4 build points, I could buy a 3-point tile and a 1-point tile, or 2 2s, or I don't have to go all the way up to 4. Maybe I only want a tile that's worth 3 that turn, and then there's none of the ones that I might want to get, or later in the game these stacks might be depleted. So you're spending those points in order to make a mine that goes deeper and deeper. Some of the tiles in the marketplace will give you some sort of an extra bonus. For example, there are some that have a big green +1. That gives you a +1 token that you can spend at any point to add 1 to your die roll. That gives you an extra build point that turn, which gives you a little bit more flexibility. There are a couple of +1s that are inside some tunnels on some of these tiles. Those +1s will add 1 to your roll that turn if you attach a tunnel to that tunnel that has a +1 on it. And then there are, of course, the altars and wells and dragon fossils. So the dragons they give you some extra points, but it doesn't matter what else is going on around those tiles. But the altars and the wells do change some things depending on what you put around it. So for example, with the altar is going to be worth 1 point or 4 points, depending on which tile you get, +1 per gem vein in the same row. So you want to line this up with additional gems in order to make it worth as much as possible. The wells are worth a certain number of points. This one, for example, is worth 2 points plus a point for every vertical tile that is touching it. So you may want to have some tunnels underneath before you place this one in your mine. And then, of course, there are the gem veins. The most common bonus would be these veins of gems. And they're interesting because they are worth 1 point, but it's multiplied by where you put it in the mine. So if it's on the first level of your mine, it's only worth 1. But if you place it at its deepest point, at the 5th level of your mine, then you get 5 points. So it's 1 point per level that your gem vein is in. So you want to maybe have these worth 5 points and put an altar beside it, but that's going to require you to dig pretty deep before you can get to that level. I found there was a real trade-off when I was playing between trying to grab some of these pieces that were going to be valuable and making sure that they were deep enough. I think in the first game that I played, I relied a little too much on that option to move one of your tiles. I thought, well, I'll have this in my mind and then I can move it somewhere else, but I didn't leave myself enough opening so that when this came up, I couldn't do all the things that I wanted to do. There is some flexibility if you mess up, if you make a mistake, because there is that round where you can move one of the tiles, one of the tunnels in your mine. It has to be at an end, an extreme, they call it at an extreme point in your mine so that it's not going to break one of your tunnels. So if it's at the end of a tunnel, you can move that somewhere else. You might be able to get a gem vein deeper into your mine because that's going to be worth more points, or line up an altar in a row that has more of those gem veins in it. So you have a round where you can do that. If you roll a 1 on the die, you're also allowed to move one of your tiles. And I found myself in the first game relying on that a little bit too much. I was trying to grab the pieces that I wanted, and then I thought, well, I'll be able to move them later when I roll a 1 or when that round counter comes up. But unfortunately, I relied on that too much, and I didn't have, when it did come up, I did not have the space to move things the way that I wanted it to, and that wound up messing up my game. Another thing you can do if you roll a 1 is you can draw from a deck of additional missions and items. So the missions are all about having a certain tile at a certain depth of your mine. The items might be things like a cave raven, where you get to roll the die a second time and add your rolls together, so you get more build points. You could get some wall torches that will give you extra points for the dragon fossils that are in your mine. So there are, sometimes those items are going to give you bonus points at the end. Sometimes they give you some ability earlier on in the game. What are the mechanisms involved here? Well, of course, it's tile drafting and then tile placement in your mine. An important factor in this game is that these tiles cannot be rotated. They always have to have the die, the little square with the pips inside it, facing up on the top right. So you can't turn them around to change the direction that those tunnels are going in, which does, to an extent, simplify things. It makes the pieces maybe a little bit less flexible and requires you to plan out things a little bit more, but you're also not doing as much of the mental rotation exercises that you might be doing, say, in some of the other tile games where you're working with hexes or something like that. you're drafting and placing, and you're doing that with an eye towards those end game bonuses so that you can get as many rewards as possible and earn as many points as possible. Another thing to mention about this game is that there's no take that. None of these tiles will interfere or affect another player's mind. The worst that you can do maybe is take a tile that your opponent wanted, so there's not a lot of player interaction in the game. What skills are you working on when you play a game of Dinamine? Well, you're doing spatial reasoning and planning. So you're trying to figure out how these tunnels will fit within the construction that you have in front of you on your board. You're planning ahead to maximize those points. There's not, like I said, a lot of mental rotation, but it is a very, very spatial game. So you're using those visual, spatial problem solving and planning skills. Maybe a little bit of working memory in that you're calculating the number of points and you're working on those awards, but really we're talking more about spatial skills when we're talking about a game of Dinamine. Now, this is a Kickstarter, so some things might change about the rules or the components or the complexity, but if I were to give you my final thoughts based on this prototype, I would say we are talking about a straightforward tile laying game with squares rather than hexes that can be rotated, so it's not too complicated, with a wide variety of choices in terms of the marketplace. So in some of the other games you might be just drawing your tiles from a stack, but in this one you've got multiple stacks that you can choose from, so there's a lot to think about. And I think that the lack of rotation and the ability to see so many of these pieces at once is a factor that does simplify the tile laying mechanism for new players or for younger players. So I definitely like that. And of course I like the theme of crafting a mine and building these tunnels so that everything fits together. It's like you're building a puzzle in front of you. Now, one thing that might be kind of a deal breaker for some players is that there is no player interaction. We found ourselves when we were playing the game sort of helping the other players. Oh, maybe you can take this piece or this would fit over here. But there's not a lot of interaction in the gameplay. So we were able to sort of chat a little bit. We could think about what it was, what piece we might need next or what part of the mine we wanted to fill in. But it wasn't a game where we were destroying. There was no dynamite or anything where we could destroy the other player's mine. Will that change in the actual Kickstarter? I mean, maybe it's possible there might be a mission that would allow you to mess things up somehow. But I think that we don't like take that at our house. I don't want to destroy my kids' work that they've been working on or wreck their plans too much. Sometimes it's fun to do that, but it's not a mechanism that we automatically go to. So take that isn't a way that we play very much anyway. But I know some people really want that player interaction to happen. This is not a game that does that. The other thing I would say is that on the mission cards as they stand, maybe my eyes are old, but I did find it a little hard to find the tiles that go with the mission cards because the pictures, let me see if I can find one here. The pictures are pretty small, so you can see that the tile in the direction it goes, but it might be nice if this were a bit bigger so that the pips on here would be more visible for someone who, if I'm not making these videos, I'd be wearing reading glasses. So it would be nice if those pieces, those graphics were a little bit easier to see, but none of those are a game breaker for me. Like I said, I don't like take that in my games, and I do like sometimes being able to just create kind of a puzzle. So it is a good simple introduction to those tile laying games, and you get a bit of drafting as well. And that in a nutshell is Dinamine. I will put a link to the Kickstarter campaign in the show notes below this video, but if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments section of the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.